This past week I had coffee. That's what pastors do during the week, is we go off and meet people for coffee. But I had coffee this week with Sarah Trone-Garriott, who's an ELCA pastor who works for DMARC, Des Moines Area Religious Council, which coordinates and supplies over a dozen food pantries in the Des Moines area. And she wanted to meet with me because she wanted to share with me a growing crisis DMARC is facing with food insecurity in our communities. Over the past few years, these food pantries all around the area have been seen a need increasing exponentially. So much so that this year, 2024, they are seeing record numbers of unique individuals being assisted. In fact, this year, this July, DMARC food pantries assisted 28,047 individuals. Busiest month on record in 50 years. Sarah shared that there's a real anxiety at DMARC that they won't be able to keep up. The unsustainability of this trend in the coming months and in the coming years, and it has been climbing and continues to climb. Now, my conversation, it was interesting coincidence, maybe coincidence, but my conversation with Sarah happened only days after receiving an email from Waukee Area Christian Services, which is just right down the road. We received an email that they actually had their busiest day ever in July in all their history. Now, part of the alarm about this trend is usually July is not the historically high point in food need or visits to food pantries. Usually that's in November or around Thanksgiving. DMARC estimates, and I was surprised at this statistic, that 1 in 4 residents of Des Moines are food insecure and visit a food pantry. 1 in 4. In fact, that means you're probably going to interact with people this week that use a food pantry to provide enough food for their families. Now, I always think it's ironic, the irony of Iowa, which could be described as the state that feeds the country, cannot feed its own residents. And we all know there are various factors that lead to the food insecurity in our state. Among those, the rising cost of food, the rising cost of living expenses, housing costs, medical expenses, transportation. It's not uncommon, and we often hear the stories, and they do in the pantries, of people either choosing to pay for food or to pay for shelter or to pay for medicines. People are struggling profoundly in our communities. Now, part of the frustration of this, as this crisis begins to increase and grow more and more, is Iowa is one of the few states in this country refusing to use federal monies readily available in SNAP programs to provide direct assistance to struggling families. Iowa is refusing to do that. We do not have a scarcity of food. We do not have enough to go around. All we have to do is simply request the federal government for a federal grant, but for ideological reasons, the state of Iowa does not want to use the federal assistance program. Now, I understand underlying these ideological stances are particular narratives we hear, and we may have even spoken ourselves, about those who need food assistance. These narratives paint a picture of people undeserving of assistance because of some perceived laziness or wrong personal choices or expected abuse of the system. The assumption underlying these narratives is that people are undeserving of the assistance, right? Only those who deserve it are worthy to get help. So I was struck by that in the line in our text this morning. How does God's love abide in anyone who has the world's goods and sees a brother and sister in need and yet refuses to help? Now, what strikes me in that line, how can anyone who has got the world's goods and sees a brother and sister in need and yet refuses to help? I don't see the line that says the brother and sister have to be deserving of the help, or who qualifies for help because they are worthy of that help. No, the question really is posed not directed at those who need help. The question is posed to us. I pointed out early, 1 John is often called the letter of love. And this is apparent in the few verses we read this morning. We know love by this, the writer says, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. Not particular brothers and sisters, but for all our brothers and sisters. And then the writer goes on to say, little children, let us love not in word or in speech. Let us love not simply by what we preach on Sunday morning, but let us love in deed and in truth. In other words, if we claim we love God and love one another, we are given this commandment, it's a rather intimidating one, to lay down our lives, to live in our deeds and actions towards those who are in need and in pain with our own deeds and actions and truth. I don't know if many of you remember back over 10 years ago, a fun little book came out titled The 5 Love Languages. Who's heard of that book? The idea that each of us has a preferred love language, ways we express our love for our partner, for our family, for those around us, for our friends. And we might express our love in 5 different ways. One of them is words of affirmation, or one of them, language of love, is spending quality time together, or way we might express our love is through physical touch, or even the giving and receiving of gifts. The one I want to lift up is one that I really identify, a language of love that is simply acts of service, which might entail little things like doing the laundry or washing the dishes or bringing coffee to your spouse in bed. Just doing things for others. And I think the love language of 1 John are acts of service in deed and in truth. Now, this is what we believe. That Jesus embodied and preached God's love profoundly. That God's love, God's grace comes to us unmerited and unearned. That God's love is an act of service. God's love is a gift where Jesus laid down his life, literally laid down his life for us, not because we deserved it, not because we had the right ideas or did the right things or said the right words, but because God's love is grounded in that unselfish, unimaginable giving and out of abundance. God's language of love was embodied in Jesus Christ, who laid down his life in acts of service, who healed and welcomed and lifted up the undeserving. So I'm going to give you a little Bible trivia question this morning, and whoever can answer this gets to heaven, okay? And preachers aren't allowed to answer this question, okay? Because they're not getting to heaven. I know that. So. What is the one miracle to show up in all four Gospels? The one miracle shows up in all four, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Feeding of the multitude. Yes, you get in. The feeding of the 5,000. Now think about that. That's the one miracle that shows up in each of the gospel writers' story. The feeding of the multitudes. And that miracle was taking something that was very little. You know, remember the story, 5 loaves and fishes, and creating an abundance with leftovers that filled 12 baskets. And it was given not because people qualified to receive the food. It was given not because they felt like these were deserving people. They didn't ask them questionnaires. It was given to them because they were hungry. Food was given out of a sense of abundance, an abundance of love. So your challenge this week, I'm going to ask you to lay down your life for someone, to some concrete act and deed of service, maybe to a stranger, maybe to your spouse, maybe your kids, to your mom or dad. But lay down your life and show your love in deed and truth. To God be the glory this day and forevermore. Amen.